And in the Buddha's own history himself and Shuyun, you'll see, and many of the monks and nuns who cultivate, reach a point in their meditation where all of a sudden, and they describe it, ghosts and spirits and goblins and sprites and all kinds of things manifest. It seems like the earth is shaking in 6 ways, and it's real. And there's lightning, and there's thunder, and there's strong winds, and sometimes wild animals, terrific things appear, or very seductive enticements and so forth. And they all describe this. And so we were talking about this last night, about the antidote to what he's describing here is this just calm equanimity that just sees everything as the same, nothing special. And because you're not seeking or wanting anything, when these things manifest, there's nothing to pull you out into that out of either fear or fondness. And so you simply, with a calm, maybe dispassionate, but unattached, ungrasping mind, observe the rise and fall of these phenomena, and they pass. Each one of those reports, as exotic and as dramatic as they are, not moving, they pass. And so the question is, well, are these real or are they fiction? Are they fantasy? Are they outside or are they inside? And if you read them closely, they don't make that discrimination. They don't draw that dichotomy. And so at some point in the practice of this, one way to look at it is from the enlightened being's point of view, what we call the world and what we call our mind and consciousness is a rather narrow, almost myopic kind of containment of our consciousness. It isn't the full extent of our consciousness, but we've shrunk it down, we've collapsed it down to this me and mine, inside and outside dimensions. And so when you begin the process of the self-cultivation of breaking the attachments and the grasping, as you do that, the mind then naturally expands and lets go and opens up to a fuller capacity, where inside and outside, what was perceived as inside and outside, or me and others, or this world and another world, or worldly and world transcending, all start to seem as if, you know, theatrical constructs. Just like you look at a play and you say, oh, there's the proscenium and there's the town, and then the curtain closes and they move that facade away and there's something else. In the same way, through the awakening process, you see that all these dichotomies are not real. They're just sort of projections we make and create little containers. So at this point, their states are neither inside nor outside, because consciousness, as the text describes, and I use a more contemporary idea, is a distributed property. It's not a narrow, one-dimensional thing that belongs to my consciousness, but it is distributed across the entire Dharma realm. And so this consciousness, or this awareness in the unenlightened phase, is narrowed down to me and mine. But when it opens and expands, it doesn't have these limitations. And that's why they have these, upon this awakening experience, they see, in fact, that the Dharma realm and consciousness are one and the same, that all living beings and this living being are one and the same. In fact, the Avatamsaka says, this world and all worlds, my person and all beings in all worlds are non-dual. It's like, whoa. So when they get to this stage, when they're cultivating, it's neither an inside nor outside phenomenon. So what he says here, but because the mind is still not free and liberated, it's still grasping and seeking, when we begin this process of meditation, there's this tension of the opening and expanding, and then the wanting to grab and hold on to each phase of opening and expanding and say, this is it, this is it, this is it. So you get a little light ease and you say, that's it, I've got it. Or you get a little direct insight into something pretty profound, and you think, now I've got it. And so it's this tension between letting go and opening up and then holding on and grasping. And this defines the process. So he's saying when you begin this practice, the mind naturally wants to grow, naturally wants to expand, naturally wants to open up what's called its purity and wondrous nature. Its bright, pure, wondrous nature. However, because we have any series called persistent wrong views, subtle attachments, delusions, graspings, there's this then manifestation of states, illusory states we call frivolous, that shroud the mind, and we take this as wondrous and profound, and we get so absorbed we can't let go. So this is what he's going into here. Now if we go on, okay, so he's saying these frivolous notions or these understandings or these states are simply projections of a shifting, and we've used 3 different words here. We haven't figured out which one captures it. So when you see slash, it means we're still in the process of debating what's the best. And sometimes we come up and say maybe 2 instead of 1 captures it. Shifting, agitated, turbulent, stirred up, unsettled consciousness. So that's why the Chan session, when consciousness moves, the 10,000 things are created. When consciousness settles, the 10,000 things settle and return to one. This is also called, now he's using language here because in the teachings, depending on different schools, cultivators, practitioners, and the teachers who do this try to map out a psychology or a topology of how this is. In other words, it's not just, oh, your state is this and your state is that, but they see these as recurring motifs that are common to human consciousness. So it's almost scientific in that sense. They're mapping out a terrain, a topology, a landscape of various states of mind and body and experiences that go with this practice of cultivation. Some people apparently will experience all of these in some progressive way. Some people only experience some of these. Some have some and skip the others. So it's not fixed. It's not like, oh, this is a map that you follow and go through, but it does map out quite a few of the changes and permutations that can happen, okay? And so one of these is the language they use is, we translate as delusions. It's a kind of misunderstanding, misperception, a lack of clarity about the way things really are at various levels. And then sometimes this is called delusions of views, delusions of thoughts. So they break it down even further. And what they're describing is basically the unawakened mind in its various structures, how it sets up, and how it, in a categorical way, encounters, experiences, translates, interprets, and projects and creates a real world. And these are all sort of like, you could say they're like lenses. If you think about it as I don't know if anybody's into photography here, but if you're into photography, you realize by putting a different lens on the camera, you get a different perspective. You can deepen the depth of field, you can shorten the depth of field, you can have macro, where you can see these little drops on a little bug's back, and then you can have telephoto where you see the moon. And if you take the range of lenses and see them as views or as thought categories of delusions and perceptions, you see the mind has all these capacities to do things. And that's why in our ordinary life we can go through experiences and have different feelings, different sensations, different perceptions with the same things. But with a different lens, they're different. And all of you have examples of this. It can be a friendship. Somebody you're close to, one day they look one way, one day they look the other way, but if you were to take a picture of them, they'd be the same person. So what has changed is not them per se, but the lens at which you're looking at them. And I've seen this most dramatically, again, once on when Han Shan and I were doing a pilgrimage, this person came up, and when he found out that his wife was having an affair, his visual perception of her went from loving, attractive, beautiful, and so forth, to the opposite, to the point that he wanted to kill her. So from within a few minutes, going from, this is the love of my life, look at this picture of my beautiful wife, to this is my nemesis, this is the person that has hurt me painfully, and blah, blah, blah. And all that changed was his awareness or consciousness, and suddenly that was a different person. People do this with creating enemies. There's a whole psychology of how we then turn the other into an enemy. Even though they're human beings just like us, we go through a process of putting on lenses that change them. Experiences of your hometown, of going back to your grade school or something. Simple things like your old room where you used to stay. What it looked like when you first came, your college dorm room, and then as you went back years later. Or even your college campus, which at one point was the portal to the universe. It was the biggest thing. I remember elementary school was that for me. When I left kindergarten, I went to elementary school. It was like, wow, this is like Oxford. And then I go back now, and it's just this little dinky thing on a side street. And there's, you know, consciousness shifts and changes. So that's what's being talked about here. And he's saying there's a very subtle and there's a very coarse level to this. And what he's talking about now is something that's very subtle. We went through this. He was talking about the coarse. Now we're talking, he said, about a subtle, continuous ebb and flow, and a rising and cessation. And so this consciousness, this perceptual thing, why we have so many moods and fluctuations is because of this ebb and sensation. One thought arises and we see it one way. A feeling comes and we see it another way. Another emotion comes in and we see it yet another way. We think there's a lot going on out there. But in fact, all we're doing is just shifting the lenses, and now they're colored and they're multi-leveled, and some of them are almost, what you'd say, fragmented, so that reality shifts and changes into all these pieces and parts. And in this ebb and flow of continuousness, we think that that's what's going on out there. But in fact, all we're doing is constantly, in this shifting consciousness, seeing, perceiving, projecting, setting up, taking down, just scene after scene after scene, and rearranging it. This is what he's describing here. And this is the opposite of sort of the stillness of samadhi. Because what samadhi allows you to do, the process doesn't automatically stop. So when you sit in meditation, that ebb and flow, that continuous, is going on. It has an inertia. Everybody know inertia? I'm going back to my high school physics now. What's inertia? I think I understand it. Come on, there's engineers here. I know there's closet engineers here. Inertia. Right. So the tendency to maintain either in motion or stillness, unless something acts on and changes. So inertia is this holding of something. So what the inertia here is, the habit structures that we have are the inertia. This is this momentum that's driving the consciousness. It's karma. So karma being the accumulation of the thoughts, perceptions, and the results of those in the actual formation of how we feel and see about things. In other words, we are shaped as we shaped. We are shaped by our karma, and with that we're shaping at the same time. So this is the meaning of samskara. It's both formations and also forming. So this dynamic at that level is going on nonstop. And when you sit in meditation, it doesn't stop. The inertia is holding. What it does, though, is you limit the corral. You limit the arena in which it acts, and then you can watch it working. Whereas normally, we can't. We're just overwhelmed. 24/7, we're out there just running around, frantically responding, reacting, and being driven by this. When you actually come in, say, on a Friday night and sit here, this mad mind doesn't stop, but it just swirls in a smaller arena. And in that, you can start to watch it in a more clinical way, if you will. Watch it go through its permutations and changes, say, feeling, thought, impulse, memory, desire, blah, blah, blah. And you're saying, how funny, I'm just sitting here, there's nothing going on, but look at it go, look at it go, look at it go, right? And so you get to watch this. And that's what he's talking about, this continuous ebb and flow. Now, these particular kind of delusions that he's talking about, we translated the obstruction as what is known. You sent a thought on this, didn't you, in an email? What did you, on this, what's your take on this? Yeah, what is known, the obstruction of what is known. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Well, what's interesting is the language obstructs and covers. So on one hand, let's look at it as a lens. A lens can provide a focus of knowing, but it can also lose the field. You see? And so these obstructions, what we know, gives us a wonderful focus on something, but it also makes irrelevant a larger field in some way. So let's look at it as a discipline. You master one discipline, whether it's biology or history or something like this, or you know, John Donne's middle length scenes from 16 something to da-da-da. That's your area of focus. And you know that like nobody else. But the larger field of your life and other things is not there. What's happening in politics? I don't know. I mean, I run into people like this all the day. I was just watching a really interesting documentary today on savants. There's savants and there's idiot savants. But savants are individuals who through, they don't know, so some neurochemistry, either one guy got hit with a baseball on the side of his head. Just an ordinary guy in New York playing street baseball. The baseball hits him on the side of the head, he's knocked out. He wakes up. And he wakes up, and this guy from now can tell you, if you give a date, he can tell you what day that was, he can tell you the temperature of that day, and so on, so on, so on, and so forth. And he's just an ordinary guy. So there's this Rain Man, the movie is based on a true story of the actual savant who now lives in Salt Lake City, who is the basis of this. And they have incredible focused fields of knowledge that are just stunning. But at the same time, with this great ability, also goes a great disability. It's a very interesting match. And so socially, emotionally, in other ways, they often end up being stuck at 3 or 4 years old. But in this one particular area, they excel anybody else to the point that it's almost ridiculous how brilliant it is. So these are called savants, and they don't know quite how it works. But you can see it in the same way, what is known as being, we have these views, either they're intellectual and conscious, or they're more subtle and emotional ways that we feel and make sense of things. And this is how we know, this is how we make sense. And while we feel that that's a very useful tool, and it really works for us, and it would work for everybody if they were bright enough to pick up on ours, because ours is really the best one. This is how we feel. If you'd only see the world the way I do, In any event, this is an obstruction at some point because it keeps us from the larger field. It narrows it down to a controlled view of something and then keeps the larger one. And so what awakening is breaking through all of these obstructions, letting them melt away so that what is known is truly as it is and not filtered through what I think, what I want, what I feel, what I hope it is. Okay? So this is very subtle how this is going. And this is what obstructs what he calls correct knowing and seeing, true knowing and seeing. If and when people mistake the diluted understanding for the truth. Now, he says, if on top of this you don't realize that that's what you're doing, and you think, I know, I see, I am sure, okay, then you can go mad. Now, in an ordinary way, you could say this is just referring, let's just say in a worldly way, you think that making money is it. You have this view that to get ahead in life, you got to make a lot of money, and making money is it. And the measure of a man, of a person, is how much they make and how much they have. This is your view, okay? And you feel that this is absolutely right, and you hang around with people that reinforce this. Right? How'd your portfolio do today? Whoa, blah, blah, blah. Wow, that new Mercedes. Whoa, So you live in this world. Not only do you have this view, the thing about the view is we surround ourselves with others with the views, right? So this is the mutual society of shared views. And it's getting more, we realize it's getting more and more the case because the information, now I'm going to digress and editorialize, sorry. The information coming to us is already filtered and filtered for us specifically. So I had a friend, and he said to me, boy, I'm really getting some great news here. You know, I'm getting this case here and this case here, and I'm always getting the news about the Green Bay Packers. And I said, well, I don't get the news about the, well, no, it's right here in the newspaper. I get it online. I said, well, where were you from? Where were you born? Well, I was born in Green Bay, Wisconsin. So I said, basically, what they're doing is they're profiling you, figuring out where you're from, and then they filter the news that will be interesting to you. They actually set up logarithms along these lines. So the more you go online and the more you hit and search things, this is all, sorry, it's recorded some way. And it's not in the great Buddha mind, it's recorded in some kind of huge computer. And they record it and they track this. And after a while, a pattern emerges. And from this pattern, they sell this information, it creates an algorithm, and you can get the news that's tailored for you. So if you're a right-wing whatever, you'll get right-wing news, and that's all you get. If you're a progressive liberal in Berkeley, you get all the progressive liberal news, and you think that's what's going on in the world. And thus people can't talk to each other anymore because they're shrinking their worlds down to these myopic, self-referential containers, and pretty cool, huh? Not only that, the algorithms are so sophisticated now that they can project what you might like, might be interested, what your leanings might be, who you might vote for, huh? No, I just, this comes to me, I just read this article, I get more lengthy things that I read, like the New York Review of Books, Times Literary Supplement, where they're doing longer stuff, but they're talking about this, a logarithm thing where the information they get, they will be able to tell how you would come down on any one issue. And then they sell it to politicians who can then pass you their information of how they stand on various issues, which is not really how they stand on various issues, it's how you think you stand on the issues. And so that what you're getting is these specialized, so that's why if you take a politician's issues statement over the country, you'll see, well, here he said black, here he said white, here he said red, here he said green. Which one is he? Well, when it's red, he says red. When it's black, he says black. So you feel, this guy's for me. But the guy's for you because he's already just playing to your preconceptions and biases and so forth. Anyhow, so enough the editorial, I'm back. So you go mad, in the sense you go mad because madness can be defined in many ways. Madness is not seeing things from a big, round perspective. It could be a narrow perspective. It could be a biased perspective. It could be you're mad for money. Now, we take this, we call this success, but from another perspective, it's a kind of madness. You see, so whatever you grab and attach to, whatever that is, you think this is really cool, this is really worthwhile. But from a sage's point of view, this grasping and attaching has now limited the greatness of your human potential down to grubbing for money or schlepping for things or wanting power or whatever it is. And so there's a kind of madness associated with this attachment and grasping. Now that's a bigger picture. And that's why if I quote to you something like the Lao Tzu from the Tao Te Ching, and Lao Tzu says, you know, I gave you that passage, he says, everybody thinks our way, the Tao, is greatly foolish, like great folly. And he says, but it's only seems folly because it's great. And then he says, as for the things that people think are great, there's no question about the folly. So from that perspective, and then he compares it, he says, everybody goes around crisp and confident in the marketplace, making this, building that, acquiring, accumulating, patting each other in the back and saying, well done, well done. Isn't this pathetic? Whereas the sage, he says, only follows what nurtures from the Tao. Seems a little bewildered, a little confused, doesn't quite make it in the world, and so on and so forth, but yet has this deep contentment and deep insight, This is folly or madness. No, this is so. That's where he's going. Now this madness, he's talking about maybe a particular madness that happens to people when they're meditating. Okay, so this is kind of a spiritual madness. what I was describing before, if we use Emily Dickinson where she says, much madness is divine sense, and what she's saying there is those who are really spiritual and divine seem mad, can seem mad. And those that are not, that seem sane, could be really mad. So just as much madness is divine sense, you can have also much success as madness. Now, what talking about here is a particular kind of spiritual madness can come along because, to put it in a brief, you've taken the market mind, the marketplace mind, and moved it into the meditation mind. So it's the same mind, but it's a different, instead of the marketplace, now it's in the meditation mall. Okay, so here he goes and he says, what is it? Roll on. And here's the big one. And this is one of the views. I'm not going to go through the list. The list is extensive. And like a lot of Buddhist lists, it starts out with 5, which then compounds to 10, which then compounds to 81 and 108, and then 108,000. Those of you who know the Buddhist math, this is how it works. And so, you know, you think, well, I only had 5, now I got 108,000. How am I ever going to get rid of these? So one of the major ones, is called a view that's grasping at views, which is a very interesting one. So it's a view that grasps onto particular ways of seeing or feeling. In this case, grasping onto things that arise in meditation. So a meditation state arises, and then you grab onto it. And this grasping, and you say, this is this. This is nirvana. This is the first stage of dhyana. This is the samapati, blah, blah, blah. And then you go to the text and you say, yes, I had that feeling. I had the feeling of light ease, and I saw this, and I saw that. I have this. And then, you know, people do this. Or they're sitting in meditation, and then they pull out their notebook and they start writing an enlightenment verse. This is called the view grasping at views. So here he hits on, he says, do not vainly hope for enlightenment. So we had a little debate about this last night. Ilona had mixed feelings about vainly. So why were you feeling?
I was worried that it would cause confusion about hope is vain, as in hoping for something that will never happen.
Okay, so the English word vainly, in vain, can mean don't vainly hope for enlightenment because you'll never get it. It's hopeless. Don't even try. That could mean vainly. But here it means vain in the sense like Ecclesiastes, all is vanity, all is empty, false, illusory. Huh? Say that again? Okay. Well, might I probe a little more and say it might have to do with the view. In other words, even how we see and interpret a word can review where our mind is oriented as opposed to what it, in other words, well, we the solution to all ambiguity is footnotes. If you pause, though, and look at the context, okay, first of all, this line occurred earlier when we started this whole segment. He says one of the mistakes everybody makes is they crave or they yearn for enlightenment, blah, blah, blah. Now, look what follows. If you say, don't vainly hope for enlightenment, the next line should be, because you're a jerk and you'll never get it. Or because you're inadequate and you can't get it. Or because you're a hopeless living being and you're never going to rise to the sagely. All that would follow from the negative reading of vainly. But the next line says, our true mind is wondrous and perfect. There's nothing whatsoever to long for. Ah, footnote not needed. Don't what? Well, that's, yeah, but that's Elizabethan English. Don't with vanity hold for enlightenment. It, you know, yo, what? You know, most people wouldn't get that. So you could say foolishly, Don't foolishly yearn for enlightenment. That would be okay. Well, you could interpret that way because vanity does mean a kind of, what would you say, misplaced pride, a sort of, I'm always thinking of the horse in George Orwell's Animal Farm. You know Molly the horse? George Orwell, Animal Farm, ring a bell. Okay, I'm always checking it because nobody reads anymore. So there's a revolution is taking place. There's serious things to be done. And Molly's always saying, I wonder what my ribbons will look like. Will I still have ribbons after the revolution? You know. So Molly is the sort of symbol of vanity, okay? Angela. Arrogant. However, it can lead to that, but here it's talking about right. Right. As you go on, you're going to see this is where he's going. But basically what vainly means here is it is vain, it is in vain. It is a fruitless effort to do this because, why? The mind is wondrous and perfect, there's nothing whatsoever to long for. So don't long for enlightenment because you're longing for that which is already whole and complete, and therefore you will actually step outside of it by longing for it. So the vanity has to do with it's a vain endeavor. It's fruitless. Why is it fruitless? Because you already have the fruit. You see what happens. This is what goes on Thursday night. Why and why we go so slowly? Because you, huh? Well, we're repeating a little bit of the discussion because you can see first we have the Chinese, then we have English, and we try to find well, what's not just the literary equivalent, but what's the idiomatic, and then what's the dynamic equivalent? What does that mean in English? Well, like waiting for Godot. So you could think of that sort of as a Western equivalent. But there's a, right, well, don't hold your breath. Now, talk about, want to get enlightened, don't hold your breath. Right. Ain't going to happen. And no, and some people will interpret that and saying, as did D.T. Suzuki even at one point, Westerners can't get enlightened. He actually made a claim when he was into the heart of his Japaneseness in defense against Western intrusions to say, we have something that you can't ever get, and that's called Satori. The Western mind cannot grasp this. Now, he changed later, but this was one of his views at one time that was coming with the Japanese revolt against Western hegemony and dominance. And to say, well, we can absorb your science, no problem, but there's something we have you can never get, which is the mind, the Eastern mind of Satori. Okay, so that could be vainly too, but here, we can leave it for now. You all can, this is what I do, just all think about it some more. Not too much, but know that the context here will help explain what vainly is. There's nothing to long for. As our false thoughts harden and congeal, our state of mind becomes a struggle between the sense organs and sense objects. Confusion gives rise to karma. So here what he's talking about is everything is whole, everything is complete, there's nothing lacking, okay? This is called the nature, Foxing, the Buddha nature. So we see this expression again and again. Therefore do not seek outside because you have everything whole and complete. But because these thoughts harden and congeal, then we start seeking after states and grasping, and actually then doing the irony of ironies, seeking for, yearning for awakening. Based on, and the reason it's off is because the fundamental view is off. The fundamental view says, I am inadequate, I am lacking. I do not have the capacity for this. I must go out and get this somehow, either through my own endeavors, through acquisition and searching, or through somebody else or something else. Now, this might be a better translation of Wai Dao in Chinese. Wai Dao, literally outside way, means you're seeking for this state of awakening outside your own being, outside your own consciousness, outside your own person. It doesn't mean, as some people interpret it, other religions. But it means anything that you turn to outside your own nature to cultivate and to realize this awakening, whatever you're going for. Now, this could be, quote, another religion. It could be some magic elixir. It could be some guru. Okay, it could be a special mantra. Whatever you attach to is saying, this is the thing that will do it for me. And if I only had that, then I could have awakening. This, as he's saying, is the view you need to watch and be aware of and avoid. Avoid this at all costs is what he's saying. Because it can't lead to where you think it's going to go. Any questions on this? We'll go into this a little more next time and talk about it, but I wanted to frame it so, because what I was describing last week and what most of the texts describe, sometimes they call it the mad mind, sometimes they call it the frantic mind, sometimes they call it the seeking mind, sometimes the Buddha uses the term the mind on fire, the burning mind. Different metaphors are used, but the same thing comes out again and again and again. This inertia of this mind, grasping, seeking, wanting, acquiring, built on a view that I don't have, I'm lacking, and so forth, becomes so habituated, so strong, that even when we realize that all the worldly things you could possibly acquire will slip through your fingers and they mean nothing in the end, even when we have that realization, we come to spiritual practice, and that same mind now is in gear for this. And we compete and fight with others, with ourselves for this awakening. If we're not getting it, we get down on ourselves. If we're getting it, we think, I'm almost arrived, I'm almost there, and we go up and down. And what he's describing here is there is joy, there is fulfillment, there's incredible, wondrous bliss, but it's not up and down. It doesn't come, it doesn't go. And you don't have to seek it and you don't lose it. All you have to do is just be in it, because it is there 24/7 if you only stop to just be in the fullness of your own being, which is, and it's like, what? No, wait. And we go back and we think, how can that be? That's just too obvious. It must be something mystical. It must be something beyond. And then we begin this process again. And then you go from teacher to teacher, and you go from, where did this come up? Stacy, was this in our class about taking refuge? There was a discussion about taking refuge. Yeah, somebody brought it up about you take refuge with the triple jewel. Mm-hmm. Right, and now the Buddha's gone, so what do we do? So what this came up, it comes in a discussion, now I'm remembering, in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, Mahaparinirvana Sutra, which is the Pali text. The Buddha is leaving the world. He is sick. He's very sick. He said he has food poisoning. And he knows he's going. And so he's reclining. And there's these wonderfully moving passages from the sutra about his passing and the disciples' reaction. And Ananda is just distraught, because Ananda has really taken refuge with this Buddha, this sage, this teacher. And now he's thinking, not only I, but my colleagues and the generations to come will have no teacher. What are we to do? And so one of the disciples comes up and says, okay, there's other teachers out there, and he gives the list, goes through the yellow pages of spiritual teachers, you know, around that time. He says, shall we go with this one, this one, this one? What do you, Buddha, how about, just nod your head. This, what do you think? And the Buddha says, oh. He says, don't take refuge with the teacher, take refuge with the teachings. So he moves the discussion away from the teacher to the teachings, and then ultimately moves the discussion away from, we go through this kind of hermeneutic, oh, but you got to really take refuge with yourself. Huh? Be a lamp unto yourself, be an island unto yourself. So you're moving back into the only discernment tool you have is to turn back into your own essential nature as the marker and all these other expedients. So the teacher, the teachings, the community, all of these are expedient devices to help you know for yourself directly. Now this is very tricky. So in a sense, what's happening here is Han Shan's doing a similar thing of saying you don't need to seek outside. You have it all whole and complete. You just need to be able to discern the landscape of your own mind as you go through this return, and you'll be okay. But if you think it's outside of you, that's where you make a mistake. It's kind of subtle, but really important, yes. Well, so this is what we're doing in this class. We're trying to map out the hermeneutical strategies that Buddhism presents. On one hand, Buddha says you absolutely need a Shanjursha, a Kalyana Mitra. You'll get lost without it. And on the other hand, he says, let go of that teacher. You don't need the teacher. Which one is the teaching here? So you're nodding. Which one's the teaching, Sarah? You need it or you don't? Because the Buddha's going, and he's the teacher, and Ananda's saying, look, you told us the teacher's really it, and you're going, I'm going to drown. Well, now we're back to something called upaya. At a certain stage, having a teacher is absolutely essential. So you have to distinguish in Buddhism between what is necessary at any one stage and what's sufficient. Different things may be necessary at different stages. And this is the subtlety of what's going on here. If we start here with this teaching, everything is whole and complete. The Buddha nature is full within you. Just realize this, okay? Class over. And that's what Shuyan says in the Shanghai talk. He says, that's it. And he said, in the past, there were people whose good roots were such, they heard, they went, wow, you're right. I'm gone. He said, however, now in Shanghai, it's a little more complicated. People have become, covered over. He wasn't talking about Berkeley in 2014. He was talking about Shanghai in the 30s. So he said, we have to come up with all the expedients. You need to sit in meditation. You need to hold the 5 precepts, and the 8 precepts, and the 100 blah, blah, blah precepts. And then you need blah, 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 blah. And he said, all of these expedient devices we're giving to them because if we didn't give it to them, they would just sink under their own stupidity and bad habits. But essentially, you don't need any of this. So he says, that's why basically, ban lai wu yi wu. Basically, there's not one thing. Where can dust alight? This is a fundamental teaching. But if you're not ready to be free, then dust is something you need to cling to. So all of these teachings then become expedient devices, necessary though not sufficient, to counteract a particular place that you're stuck at any one time. And the only reason we get stuck is because we get caught up in these things and forget we have this whole and complete nature. So to somebody, the Buddha will just say, thus. And you go, huh, thus. Over. Now, we could try this. My teacher could have done that to me 1,000 times. Well, what do you mean by that? What does thus mean? Nothing would click. But for somebody else, it would be perfect. So, again, what we have to do is step back into this and realize what's going on here is Probably the closest thing is the parable of the raft, which I've given a number of times here. Everybody know that one? So basically, the Buddha is sitting down with his disciples, and says, okay, you're on this shore, and there's a lot of problems on this shore. There's a lot of dangers. There's bandits, there's poisonous animals and insects and snakes, there's tax collectors, the whole thing. On the other shore, it's really free of all of that. There's nothing external or internal to bother you at all. It is perfect bliss, peace, happiness, and whatnot. But there's this moving, treacherous water in between, and how do you get over to that shore? There's no ferry boat in this area, okay? We're living in a totally free marketing economy, and there's no entitlement program, so there's no infrastructure. Oops, editorial, come back. So there's no ferry boat that goes across the river. And there's no, and the Buddha says, what are you to do? Are you just going to throw up your arms and stay on the shore? He said, no. Well, what would a good person would go along the shore, grab sticks and bamboo and twine and just put something that floated together, and then vigorously with their legs and arms, kick yourself until you floated to the other shore. And Buddha said, not bad. That's a good idea. And he said, now when you're on the other shore, should you then take that raft and put it on your shoulders and carry it around? And they said, no, that would be dumb, because you already used the raft to get to the other shore. You don't need it anymore. And he says, in the same way, bhikkhus, my teaching is a raft. All of my teachings are rafts. They're meant to get you from this shore to the other shore. Once you're to the other shore, you can let go of the raft. So he calls the raft Dharma. The interesting closing phrase is, in the end, you have to let go of Dharma. How much the more so a Dharma? Which is that which is not Dharma. I mean, you can't even get on the raft if you're not going to let go of that. So again, you have this metaphor, this analogy of this actual teaching deconstructing itself back to, and it can only do that if the presumption is you don't need anything, it's already whole and complete. So they're all devices to trigger their recovery. But if you say you're not whole or complete, then you do need, and you feel you need. And from the Buddha's point of view, this is where the problem comes in, at least in this. Okay? Good stuff. Interesting. One of the things to realize, though, is not jumping off the raft too quickly. Not abandoning the raft too quickly. And this is the key, because you can say, well, Buddhism has nothing whatsoever. Therefore, I will pick up nothing whatsoever and I'm free. Well, if you're in the middle of the river, you could drown without that. So you need to know, when is it time to pick it up? When is it time to let go? And this becomes a very subtle, reflective kind of process. And this is where arrogance becomes a problem. Go back to your point, and I think what he was talking about too. Arrogance can lead you to a view that says, I don't need a raft, I don't need a teacher, I need nothing. I'm already whole and complete. When in fact, you're just smothering in hubris. And so when that happens, my teacher would say, there's no way for you to grow. You can't learn from anybody or anything because you think already you're in that stage. And he said, this becomes, and that's why it's one of the major impediments. There's tersna, okay, that's one. Enmity, hatred, avidya, ignorance, and then arrogance as one of the major impediments to awakening, because you're full of yourself. There's nothing, and that's the great story about the scholar who goes to the monk, remember? Oh, my teacher told this. The scholar goes to visit the monk, and the scholar feels, I have studied widely, I've mastered all the classics and so forth, I really know. And this monk has lots of people coming to him, and he hasn't even got a bachelor's degree, and I'm going to hold forth and show him. So he sits down, and the monk says, oh, before we start, you're such an honored guest, I want to serve tea. And so he puts out 2 teacups, and he says, yes, it better be really good tea, because, you know. And so he starts pouring into the teacup, and then it's full, and he keeps pouring. He keeps pouring, and the tea's flowing over the cup, over the table, on the floor, onto his garments. And he says, stupid monk, don't you realize the cup's already full? There's no more you can put into it. He says, oh, excuse me. He says, some people are like that too. They're already full of their own views and opinions, and there's no place for anything to go. So your coming here has been in vain. This is this wonderful story. So again, arrogance becomes one of those elements that is a false fullness. It's not a true fullness. Yeah. Okay. More next week. Those of you interested, every Thursday night, we get together across the street, and we put this all up, and then we go at it with translation. So if you got a little exercise here and want to join in, you're welcome to come. What time we meet? 7:30. Yes. So Stacy's there, Iwan's there, Ilona's there, Suzanne's there, Alice is there, Alan is there. So you're all welcome. I have an announcement to make, I guess. Somebody left this for me?
Yes. Please announce it.
Please announce it. Buddhist Text Translation Society is having a booth at the San Francisco Nears Street Fair on February 15th and 16th from 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Complimentary booklets on meditation, kindness poetry, Chinese vegetarian cooking books will be given away during this festival event. Dharma Buddhist University will co-host a booth with BTTS and share the information. Is it just vegetarian cooking books, or is it going to be real food? They're going to give no real food.
You can cook at home.
You can So this is the motto. If you give them one meal of vegetarianism, they're full. If you teach them how to cook at home, they can eat forever, right? Okay. All right, so we'll close here for tonight and pick up next week. Every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Ming San Bao. Okay.